The afternoon sun bathed the city of Richmond, Virginia, in a golden glow as Bethany Carter exited the community center, where she'd spent her day volunteering. Her work assisting at-risk youth was physically draining, but her soul brimmed with fulfillment. Adjusting her modest cardigan, she smiled at the thought of her grandmother, a pillar of strength and wisdom in her life. Bethany paused beside her worn sedan, its paint faded and tires slightly worn. Her gaze lifted to the horizon, where memories of her grandmother came rushing back. "One day, Bethany," her grandmother would say, her voice full of hope, "we're going to ride in a car that feels like flying." Those words, spoken so many years ago, had become a promise Bethany was determined to fulfill, not for herself, but in honor of the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise her. Taking a deep breath, she muttered, "It's time, Grandma. Time to make your dream come true." She climbed into her car and drove across town to Grandwood Elite Motors, a luxury car dealership known for its sleek vehicles and upscale clientele. The building stood as a temple to extravagance, with its glass walls reflecting the setting sun and rows of gleaming cars displayed like trophies. Bethany hesitated for a moment as she parked in the lot, her hands gripping the steering wheel. The dealership's pristine appearance was intimidating, but she reminded herself of her grandmother's favorite saying, "You deserve to be wherever you choose to stand." With a deep breath, she stepped out of her car, her modest clothes and well-worn sneakers a stark contrast to the glittering luxury surrounding her. The automatic doors whooshed open, welcoming Bethany into a world of opulence. The polished floors gleamed under the lights, and the scent of new leather and high-end detailing products filled the air. A young salesman with a bright smile and slightly nervous energy approached her. His name tag read, Ryan. "Good evening, ma'am," Ryan said, his tone friendly but cautious. "Welcome to Grandwood Elite Motors. How can I assist you today?" Bethany returned his smile, her demeanor warm but purposeful. "I'm interested in exploring your latest models." Ryan's smile faltered for a brief second as his eyes flicked over her outfit. Still, he quickly recovered, gesturing toward a row of vehicles. "Of course. Let me show you some options." Bethany followed him to a sleek silver sedan, its modern design and elegant curves a testament to engineering brilliance. As she ran her hand along the hood, a wave of emotion washed over her. "Look at this beauty, Grandma," she thought. "This is the one you dreamed of." Ryan began explaining the car's features, but their interaction caught the attention of another salesperson standing nearby. Dan Harper, a senior salesman with years of experience, watched the exchange from the reception counter. His sharp suit, slicked back hair, and air of self-importance were his trademarks. He prided himself on knowing real buyers from window shoppers, and Bethany didn't fit the profile. "Ryan," Dan called out, his voice loud enough to carry across the showroom. "I'll handle this one." Ryan hesitated but stepped aside as Dan strode over, exuding confidence. "Good evening, ma'am," Dan said, his tone overly smooth. "Is there something specific I can help you with?" Bethany met his gaze, calm and composed. "Yes, I'd like to know more about this model." She gestured toward the silver sedan. Dan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, the Grandwood Elite 700. This is one of our finest models. Fully loaded, top-of-the-line features." He paused for effect before adding, "Of course, it's also one of our most expensive vehicles. Not exactly for everyone." Bethany's polite smile didn't waver. "I understand. Could you walk me through the details?" Dan's eyebrow twitched in irritation. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone he'd already dismissed as a non-buyer. "Sure," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But, we also have a great selection of pre-owned vehicles. They're more budget-friendly." The jab hung in the air, but Bethany refused to rise to the bait. "Thank you for the suggestion," she said evenly. "But I'm interested in this car." Dan sighed dramatically. "Ma'am, this is a six-figure vehicle. It's not just about looking nice, it's an investment. Are you certain you're prepared for that?" Bethany's calm exterior didn't falter. "Could you tell me about the safety features?" she asked, steering the conversation back to the car. Dan's patience wore thin, but he plastered on a fake smile. "Of course. This model comes with adaptive cruise control, lane-keeping assistance, and a state-of-the-art collision avoidance system." He rattled off the features mechanically, his voice laced with sarcasm. Bethany nodded thoughtfully. "Impressive. Would you mind showing me the interior? I'd like to see the craftsmanship up close." Dan hesitated, then forced a grin. "Sure thing," he said, pulling a key fob from his pocket. As he opened the car door, he couldn't resist another jab. "But just so you know, even sitting in this car might be more excitement than some people are used to." Bethany stepped closer, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. Grace is the best response to arrogance. "I'm sure I'll manage," she said, her tone neutral. Dan's colleagues had begun to notice the interaction. Some exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with his behavior. A younger salesperson named Sarah shifted uneasily, her disapproval evident. Bethany slid into the driver's seat, running her fingers over the soft leather and marveling at the craftsmanship. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her voice genuine. "Sure is," Dan replied, "and it's reserved for buyers who understand its value." Bethany ignored the jab, instead focusing on the details. She asked about the navigation system, the upholstery options, and the warranty, each question showcasing her knowledge and confidence. Bethany's questions were thoughtful and deliberate, her demeanor calm and composed. Despite Dan's attempts to rattle her, she remained steadfast, her focus unwavering. Dan, however, was growing increasingly agitated. His forced smile tightened with each of her inquiries, and his responses became curt. He gestured to the interior features with exaggerated motions, his tone dripping with condescension. "As you can see, the stitching is hand-sewn by artisans, and the sound system is designed to rival that of a concert hall," he said, barely concealing his irritation. Bethany nodded, absorbing the information without reacting to his tone. She took her time inspecting the car, running her fingers over the fine details and imagining her grandmother's joy at seeing her in such a vehicle. Dan shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his watch. His colleagues continued to watch from a distance, some whispering among themselves. A few, like Sarah, were visibly uncomfortable with Dan's behavior, while others smirked, amused by what they assumed was a waste of time. But Bethany paid them no mind. She was here for a purpose, and she wouldn't be deterred. After a few more moments, she stepped out of the car, her movements measured and deliberate. She turned to Dan, her gaze steady. "Thank you for showing me the interior. It's exactly what I was looking for." Dan raised an eyebrow, skepticism written all over his face. "Is that so?" he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Well, then, perhaps we should discuss the price. I assume you'll need to go over our financing options?" His words were laced with implication, but Bethany didn't flinch. "No need," she said simply. "I'll be paying in full." Dan froze, his smirk faltering for the first time. He blinked, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Bethany's gaze didn't waver. "I said I'll be paying in full. Would you like to proceed with the paperwork?" For a moment, there was silence. Dan's colleagues exchanged startled glances, the whispers growing louder. Sarah's eyes widened, a small smile of satisfaction playing on her lips. Dan, however, struggled to regain his composure. He forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. "Well, that's surprising," he said, his tone uneasy. "Most of our customers prefer to explore their options first." Bethany's expression remained calm. "I know what I want," she said firmly. "Now, are you able to assist me, or should I speak to someone else?" The question hung in the air, its weight unmistakable. Dan's face turned a shade paler, and he stammered slightly as he tried to respond. No need for that," he said quickly. "I can handle it." Bethany nodded once, her demeanor professional. "Good. Let's move forward then." As Dan led her toward his desk, his usual confidence was nowhere to be seen. He fumbled with the paperwork, his hands slightly trembling as he pulled out the necessary forms. Bethany sat across from him, her posture poised and elegant. She answered his questions with precision, her voice steady. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the showroom had shifted. The staff, who had initially dismissed Bethany as an unworthy customer, now watched her with a mix of curiosity and newfound respect. Sarah, in particular, seemed delighted by the turn of events. She leaned over to one of her colleagues and whispered, "I knew there was more to her than met the eye." The colleague nodded, their expression sheepish. "Dan's really stepped in at this time," they muttered, glancing toward the desk where he sat with Bethany. As the transaction progressed, Dan's demeanor grew more subdued. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by a nervous energy, and he avoided meeting Bethany's gaze. She, on the other hand, remained composed, her every word and action a testament to her inner strength. When the paperwork was complete, Dan stood awkwardly, unsure of how to proceed. Bethany rose gracefully, extending her hand. "Thank you for your assistance," she said, her tone polite but firm. Dan hesitated before shaking her hand, his grip weak. "Of course," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Bethany turned and walked toward the exit, her head held high. As she passed the other salespeople, they parted to let her through, their expressions a mixture of admiration and embarrassment. Sarah gave her a small nod of encouragement, which Bethany returned with a faint smile. When she reached the door, she paused and glanced back, her gaze sweeping over the showroom. Her eyes met Dan's for a brief moment, and in that glance there was no malice, only quiet determination. Then she stepped outside, the door closing softly behind her. The staff stood in silence, the weight of what had just occurred settling over them. Dan remained frozen in place, his face pale and his confidence shattered. Sarah finally broke the silence, her voice firm. "Well, I hope we all learned something today," she said, her tone pointed. Several of her colleagues nodded, their expressions thoughtful. Dan, however, said nothing. He simply stared at the desk in front of him, his mind racing. Outside, Bethany stood beside her new car, the keys glinting in her hand. She took a deep breath, her heart swelling with pride and satisfaction. This wasn't just a purchase, it was a victory, not only for herself, but for every person who had ever been underestimated or dismissed. She opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat, the soft leather embracing her like a long-lost friend. As she started the engine, the low purr of the motor filled the air, a sound that spoke of power and possibility. Bethany placed her hands on the steering wheel and smiled. "This one's for you, Grandma," she whispered. Then, with the confidence of a woman who knew her worth, she drove away, leaving the dealership, and the doubts of others, in her rearview mirror. As Bethany drove away from the dealership, the emotions of the day began to settle over her like a soft blanket. The hum of the car's engine was soothing, a gentle reminder of her accomplishment. She glanced at the dashboard, the sleek design and state-of-the-art features feeling almost surreal. For a moment, she allowed herself to revel in the pride of her achievement. But her thoughts soon turned back to Dan, his dismissive tone and the assumptions he had so carelessly made about her. The sting of his words had faded, replaced by a quiet resolve. This wasn't just about a luxury car or proving him wrong. It was about addressing a deeper issue, one that extended far beyond the walls of that showroom. Bethany pulled into the driveway of her modest home, the car's headlights illuminating the familiar brick facade. The scent of lavender from her garden greeted her as she stepped out of the vehicle, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. Inside, the warm glow of her living room lamp cast a comforting light over her favorite armchair and the framed photo of her grandmother on the mantel. She set her purse down and walked over to the photo, picking it up and holding it close. Her grandmother's kind eyes and gentle smile seemed to radiate encouragement, as though she were still whispering words of wisdom from beyond. "I did it, Grandma," Bethany murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I kept my head high, just like you taught me." Sinking into her armchair, Bethany pulled a notebook from the side table and began to jot down her thoughts. The pages quickly filled with ideas, not just about her experience at the dealership, but about how she could turn it into something meaningful. She thought about the young women she mentored at the community center, many of whom faced similar challenges of being underestimated and undervalued. "This isn't just about me," Bethany whispered, tapping her pen against the edge of the notebook. "This is about creating a world where no one has to fight to prove their worth." The next morning, Bethany awoke with renewed determination. She brewed a pot of her favorite coffee and settled at her desk, a sleek black laptop glowing softly in front of her. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she drafted an email to the dealership's owner. She described her experience in detail, ensuring her tone remained professional yet firm. She didn't write out of anger or spite. Instead, her words carried a message of growth and accountability. "Your dealership represents a brand of excellence," she concluded. "And I believe that excellence should extend to the way all customers are treated, regardless of their appearance or background." After hitting send, Bethany leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. She wasn't sure what kind of response she would receive, but she knew she had done the right thing. A few days later, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen read, James Thompson, the dealership's owner. Bethany hesitated for a moment before answering. "Ms. Carter?" A warm, authoritative voice greeted her. "This is James Thompson from Granwood Elite Motors. I just read your email, and I wanted to thank you for bringing this matter to my attention." Bethany sat up straighter, her pulse quickening. "Thank you for calling, Mr. Thompson," she replied. "I appreciate you taking the time to address this." Mr. Thompson's tone was serious yet sincere. "I want to start by apologizing for the treatment you received. That is not the standard we uphold at our dealership, and I am deeply sorry for the way you were made to feel." Bethany listened intently, noting the genuine remorse in his voice. "I understand, Mr. Thompson," she said, "but my goal isn't just to point out the problem. I'd like to be part of the solution." The line went quiet for a moment before Mr. Thompson spoke again. "I admire your approach, Ms. Carter. If you're willing, I'd love to discuss how we can work together to ensure something like this doesn't happen again." Over the next few weeks, Bethany and Mr. Thompson collaborated on a series of initiatives to improve the dealership's customer service practices. They organized workshops on inclusivity and empathy, bringing in experts to lead the sessions. Bethany even shared her own experiences, her story serving as a powerful reminder of the importance of treating every individual with respect. The impact was immediate. Staff members who had once laughed along with Dan now began to reflect on their own biases. Sarah, who had always been uncomfortable with Dan's behavior, emerged as a leader in fostering a more positive environment. She often spoke up during meetings, advocating for changes that would benefit both the team and their customers. As for Dan, the transformation was more gradual. Initially resistant to the training sessions, he eventually began to participate, though his contributions were minimal. One day, during a particularly candid discussion led by Bethany, he raised his hand hesitantly. "I'd like to apologize," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "To Ms. Carter and to my colleagues, I realize now how my behavior was harmful and I want to do better." The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to Bethany. She regarded Dan for a moment before nodding. "Acknowledging the issue is the first step," she said calmly. "The real work comes next." The dealership soon gained a reputation not just for its luxury vehicles, but also for its exemplary customer service. Word spread about the changes taking place, and sales increased as more people felt welcomed and respected when walking through the doors. Bethany's influence extended far beyond the dealership. She was invited to speak at conferences and community events, sharing her story and inspiring others to challenge injustice with grace and determination. Her words resonated deeply, especially with women who had faced similar experiences. As she stood on stage at one such event, looking out at a room filled with hopeful faces, Bethany felt a sense of fulfillment unlike any she had ever known. Her grandmother's teachings had not only guided her through adversity, but it also sparked a movement of empowerment and change. After the event, a young woman approached her, clutching a notebook filled with scribbled notes. "Ms. Carter," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "your story has given me the courage to stand up for myself." "Thank you." Bethany smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You already had the courage," she said gently. "I just reminded you that it was there." That evening, as Bethany drove home in her silver sedan, she thought about how far she had come. The road ahead still held challenges, but she knew she was ready to face them. With her grandmother's wisdom as her guide and her own determination lighting the way, Bethany was unstoppable. In the weeks that followed, Bethany's life took on a new rhythm. By day, she continued her work at the community center, mentoring young women and sharing her wisdom. By night, she fielded phone calls and emails from individuals inspired by her story, many of whom sought her advice on how to navigate their own experiences with dignity and resolve. One email stood out among the rest. It came from an older woman named Mary Ann, who shared a story eerily similar to Bethany's. Mary Ann had visited a high-end boutique several months ago, hoping to treat herself to a designer handbag for her 65th birthday. Instead, she'd been met with skepticism and condescension by the store staff, who assumed she wasn't serious about making a purchase. The humiliation had driven her to leave without saying a word, and she had carried the bitterness ever since. Bethany read Mary Ann's email twice, her heart aching with empathy. She could picture the scene vividly, the quiet disappointment, the sting of judgment. She began typing a response, pouring her thoughts into each word. "Dear Mary Ann," she wrote, "thank you for sharing your story with me. I understand how painful that experience must have been, but please know this. Their assumptions about you say far more about them than they ever could about you. You are worthy of respect, no matter what anyone else might think. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that we have the power to turn moments of pain into opportunities for growth, not just for ourselves, but for others as well." Bethany encouraged Mary Ann to revisit the boutique, not out of a need for revenge, but to reclaim her sense of agency. "You don't need to prove anything to them," she concluded, "but you do deserve the joy of treating yourself without fear of judgment." A few days later, Mary Ann replied with a heartfelt note of thanks. She had returned to the boutique and purchased the handbag she'd originally wanted. This time, she walked in with confidence, radiating a quiet strength that left the staff scrambling to assist her. "I felt like a different person," Mary Ann wrote. "For the first time in years, I remembered what it feels like to hold my head high." Bethany smiled as she read the email, her chest swelling with pride. Stories like Mary Ann's reminded her why she had chosen this path, not just to advocate for herself, but to inspire others to do the same. Meanwhile, back at the dealership, the changes Bethany had helped implement were beginning to take root. The inclusivity workshops had become a regular fixture, and the staff gradually grew more attuned to the importance of treating every customer with respect. Sarah emerged as a driving force behind these efforts, often going out of her way to mentor new hires and ensure they understood the values the dealership now upheld. Dan, too, was slowly transforming. Though his journey was far from smooth, he showed genuine effort in trying to unlearn the biases that had once clouded his judgment. He sought feedback from his colleagues, listened attentively during training sessions, and even apologized to Sarah for dismissing her concerns in the past. While some of the staff remained skeptical of his motives, Bethany chose to believe in his potential for growth. One afternoon, Sarah approached Dan as he stood by a row of cars, polishing the hood of a newly arrived model. "You know," she said, her tone measured, "I didn't think you'd stick with this." Dan glanced at her, his expression a mix of curiosity and defensiveness. "What do you mean?" Sarah shrugged. "The workshops? The apologies? A lot of people wouldn't bother. They'd just double down and keep doing what they've always done." Dan sighed, setting the cloth down. "I guess I realized I didn't want to be that person anymore. Watching Bethany handle everything with so much grace, It made me see how wrong I was. I don't expect anyone to forget what I did, but I want to be better. Sarah studied him for a moment before nodding. Good, because it's not about erasing the past, it's about what you do from here on out. Dan nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Thanks, Sarah. As the dealership continued to thrive under its new leadership philosophy, word began to spread about Bethany's involvement. Customers who had previously felt intimidated by the high-end atmosphere now flocked to the showroom, drawn by its reputation for warmth and inclusivity. The change was undeniable, and it wasn't long before other businesses in the area began to take notice. Bethany found herself fielding invitations to collaborate with retailers, corporations, and even local government officials. Each opportunity brought new challenges and new possibilities, but Bethany remained grounded in her mission. She knew that true change wouldn't come overnight, but she was committed to the long haul. One day, as she prepared to speak at a leadership conference, Bethany received a surprise visitor at the community center. It was Dan, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers. Dan, she said, raising an eyebrow. This is unexpected. He shifted awkwardly, holding out the flowers. I wanted to say thank you, he said, for everything. You didn't have to come back to the dealership after what happened, but you did. And you gave me a chance to change. Bethany accepted the flowers, a small smile gracing her lips. Change is never easy, Dan, but the fact that you're trying, that matters. Dan hesitated for a moment before speaking again. I also wanted to ask if you'd be willing to mentor me. I know I have a lot to learn, and I can't think of anyone better to guide me. Bethany considered his request, her gaze thoughtful. She saw sincerity in his eyes, a genuine desire to grow. All right, she said finally, but only if you're ready to do the work. Dan nodded earnestly. I am. I promise. Over the months that followed, Dan became one of Bethany's most dedicated mentees. Their sessions were candid and challenging, forcing him to confront his biases and assumptions head-on. He often left their meetings with a notebook full of reflections, determined to apply what he'd learned. For Bethany, seeing Dan's progress was a reminder of the power of grace and perseverance. She knew that not everyone would be willing to change, but for those who were, the possibilities were endless. As she drove home one evening, her silver sedan gleaming under the fading sunlight, Bethany thought about her grandmother. She could almost hear her voice, soft and full of pride. You've planted a grove, my girl, the memory whispered. And it's growing beautifully. Bethany smiled, her heart full. The road ahead was still long, but with each step she took, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the weeks turned into months, Bethany's efforts began to ripple outward in ways she hadn't anticipated. News of her story reached local media outlets, and she was soon invited to share her experiences in interviews and panel discussions. Each time she spoke, she carried her grandmother's wisdom with her, weaving it into her messages of grace, dignity, and empowerment. At one such event, a journalist asked her a question that lingered in her mind long after the cameras stopped rolling. What drives you to keep going? They had asked, their voice curious but respectful. Bethany had paused, considering her answer carefully. I think about my grandmother, she had replied. She taught me that when we face challenges, we have two choices. We can let them break us, or we can let them shape us. I choose to let them shape me, not just for myself, but for everyone who comes after me. That evening, as Bethany sat in her living room reflecting on the interview, she received an email that stopped her in her tracks. The subject line read, Your story changed my life. The email was from a woman named Carla, who shared how Bethany's journey had inspired her to confront her own fears. Carla had spent years feeling overlooked and undervalued in her career, always afraid to speak up for fear of rocking the boat. After watching Bethany's interview, she had mustered the courage to advocate for herself during a team meeting, sharing her ideas with confidence for the first time. They listened, Carla wrote, her excitement practically leaping off the screen. "They actually listened, and it's all because of you. Thank you for reminding me that my voice matters." Tears pricked Bethany's eyes as she read Carla's words. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, the weight of the moment settling over her. It wasn't just about the car dealership or her grandmother's dream anymore. This was about creating a ripple effect, a movement that empowered people to see their worth and demand the respect they deserved. Meanwhile, at the dealership, the changes Bethany had championed continued to flourish. The atmosphere was unrecognizable from what it had been during her first visit. Staff members who once prioritized profits over people now approached their work with empathy and intention. Customers noticed the difference, and word spread quickly. Sarah, who had risen to a leadership role within the dealership, often reflected on how far they had come. She took particular pride in mentoring new hires, ensuring they understood the values that now defined their workplace. One day, as she was training a young salesperson named Mia, she shared a piece of advice that Bethany had once given her. "Every customer who walks through those doors deserves your respect," Sarah said. "Not because they might buy something, but because they're human. That's what sets us apart." Mia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'll remember that," she said. Dan, too, had become a different person. His transformation hadn't been easy. There were moments when he faltered, moments when old habits threatened to resurface. But each time, he reminded himself of Bethany's words. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but it happens one choice at a time." He had taken those words to heart, applying them not just at work but in his personal life as well. He volunteered at a local shelter on weekends, offering his time and resources to those in need. He also became an advocate for inclusivity within the dealership, often stepping in to support colleagues who faced challenges similar to those Bethany had endured. One day, as he and Sarah prepared for a staff meeting, Dan turned to her with a sheepish grin. "Do you think Bethany has any idea how much she's changed this place?" he asked. Sarah chuckled, shaking her head. "I don't think even she realizes the impact she's had," she said, "but I'm pretty sure she'd be proud of what we've accomplished." Across town, Bethany was busy planning her next project. She had been invited to join the board of a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion in the workplace. The opportunity was both exciting and daunting, but Bethany knew it was a chance to make an even greater impact. During her first board meeting, she listened intently as the other members discussed their initiatives and goals. When it was her turn to speak, Bethany shared her vision for the organization, a series of workshops designed to equip individuals with the tools they needed to advocate for themselves effectively. "We can't change the world overnight," she said, her voice steady. "But we can give people the confidence to demand better, for themselves and for others." The board members nodded in agreement, their enthusiasm palpable. Over the following months, Bethany worked tirelessly to bring her vision to life, collaborating with experts and community leaders to develop the workshop curriculum. The first workshop was held at a local community center, the same one where Bethany had spent so many afternoons mentoring young women. The room was filled with people from all walks of life, each of them eager to learn and grow. As Bethany stood at the front of the room, looking out at the sea of faces, she felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice warm. "Today we're going to talk about how to stand tall, even when the world tries to make you feel small." The workshop was a resounding success, sparking conversations and connections that continued long after the event ended. Participants left feeling empowered, their confidence bolstered by Bethany's guidance. As Bethany packed up her materials at the end of the day, a young man approached her, his expression earnest. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice tinged with awe, "you've given me the courage to believe in myself. I just wanted to say thank you." Bethany smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You already had that courage," she said gently. "I just helped you find it." That evening, as she drove home, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Bethany reflected on how far she had come. The journey hadn't been easy, but every step had been worth it. She thought about her grandmother's unwavering faith in her, the strength she had drawn from those memories, and the countless lives she had touched along the way. As she pulled into her driveway, the hum of her car's engine fading into the night, Bethany allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She had turned a moment of pain into a movement of empowerment, proving that even the smallest actions could spark lasting change. And in the stillness of that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that her grandmother would have been proud. Henry stood outside the office door, his heart thudding in his chest. His palms were damp, and he shifted uncomfortably on his feet, as if the weight of his actions pressed down on him physically. He could hear muffled voices inside, the calm, steady tone of Ella Wells, and the deeper, slightly nervous voice of Mr. Thompson. It was clear they were discussing something important, and Henry couldn't shake the feeling that his name had come up more than once. When the door finally opened, Mr. Thompson gestured for him to step inside. Henry obeyed, his movements stiff and mechanical. Ella sat across the desk, her posture impeccably straight, her face a mask of professionalism. She didn't acknowledge Henry immediately, her focus entirely on Mr. Thompson, who was still mid-sentence. "And we'll ensure the transition happens smoothly, Ms. Wells," Mr. Thompson was saying, nodding earnestly. "I'll make certain the staff are brought up to speed on all the new initiatives." "Good," Ella replied, her voice calm yet commanding. "This is an opportunity for the dealership to lead by example, not just in sales but in ethics and community engagement." Henry cleared his throat softly, drawing their attention. Mr. Thompson gestured for him to take a seat, and Henry lowered himself cautiously into the chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Ella turned to look at him, her expression neutral, but her gaze piercing. "Henry," Mr. Thompson began, his tone firm but not unkind, "Ms. Wells has shared her vision for the future of this dealership, and it includes some significant changes." Henry nodded, though he couldn't bring himself to meet Ella's eyes. "I understand, sir," he murmured. Mr. Thompson leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. "Do you? Because what we're discussing here is a complete cultural shift. We're not just talking about improving customer service. We're talking about creating an environment where everyone, staff and customers alike, feels valued and respected." I think that's a great idea," Henry stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Ella studied him silently for a moment, then spoke, her tone measured but firm. "Henry, I've seen people make mistakes before. What matters to me is how they respond to those mistakes. Are you willing to do the work necessary to grow from this?" Henry swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Yes, Ms. Wells," he said earnestly. "I've already started learning from the training sessions. I know I have a lot to make up for, but I'm committed to changing." Ella nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving his. "Good, because this isn't just about you, Henry. It's about the impact your actions have on others, the people you serve, the team you work with, and the reputation of this business." Mr. Thompson interjected, his tone serious. "Henry, you'll continue participating in the diversity and inclusion training, and I'll be monitoring your progress closely. But I want you to know that this is your opportunity to turn things around. If you fail to take it seriously, there won't be another chance. I won't let you down," Henry said, his voice trembling with conviction. Ella finally allowed a small smile to soften her features. "That's what I wanted to hear. Remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, a series of choices you make every day." As the meeting concluded, Henry left the office feeling both chastened and hopeful. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt determined to prove not only to his colleagues but also to himself that he could be better. Over the next few weeks, the dealership underwent a remarkable transformation. The diversity and inclusion training sessions became a cornerstone of their operations, with every staff member participating, from the janitorial team to the top sales executives. The sessions were led by Clara, a charismatic trainer with years of experience in corporate education. She had a knack for making even the most uncomfortable topics approachable, fostering an environment of openness and understanding. At first, many employees, including Henry, were resistant. The idea of examining their own biases felt invasive, even accusatory. But Clara was patient, guiding them through exercises and discussions that slowly peeled back the layers of their defenses. One session focused on unconscious bias, and Clara asked the group to write down their initial impressions of different customer scenarios. When Henry saw his own responses on the page, judgments based solely on appearance or demeanor, he felt a pang of shame. He realized how often he had allowed those biases to dictate his behavior, and it left him deeply unsettled. During a role-playing exercise, Clara paired Henry with Sarah, one of the dealership's newer salespeople. Sarah played the role of a customer, deliberately presenting herself in a way that might have prompted dismissal in the past, dressed in simple clothes and speaking hesitantly. Henry found himself fumbling at first, his old instincts threatening to take over. But then he remembered Ella's words. Treat every person with dignity and respect. He took a deep breath and started over, addressing Sarah with warmth and genuine curiosity about her needs. By the end of the exercise, Clara gave him a nod of approval. See, she said, it's not about who the customer is, it's about who you choose to be in that interaction. As the sessions continued, Henry began to notice changes not just in himself, but in his colleagues. The atmosphere at the dealership shifted from one of quiet competition to one of collaboration and mutual support. Employees started sharing tips and insights, celebrating each other's successes rather than competing for the spotlight. One day during a team meeting, Ella stood at the front of the room to address the staff. Her presence commanded attention, not through force, but through the quiet strength she exuded. I want to thank each of you for embracing this change, she said, her voice steady and sincere. I know it hasn't been easy, and I know we still have a long way to go. But what I've seen over the past few weeks gives me hope. Together, we're building something extraordinary, a place where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered to succeed. The room erupted into applause, and Henry found himself clapping along, a genuine smile spreading across his face. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of pride in his workplace, not just for what they sold, but for what they stood for. As the weeks turned into months, the changes at the dealership became more evident. The diversity and inclusion training sessions had not only reshaped the way employees viewed their roles, but had also created a palpable sense of camaraderie. Staff who had once operated in silos were now working together, their shared purpose strengthening the bonds between them. For Henry, every day was a lesson. He took the training seriously, participating actively and even seeking advice from Clara and his colleagues when he struggled to unlearn deeply ingrained behaviors. He began to see his job not just as a means of selling cars, but as an opportunity to connect with people from all walks of life. One afternoon, a middle-aged woman named Donna walked into the dealership. She wore a simple floral dress and carried a well-worn purse, her demeanor hesitant as she glanced around the showroom. Henry spotted her immediately, and his initial instinct was to approach her with the usual pleasantries. But he stopped himself, taking a moment to remember what he had learned. Instead of assuming anything about her, he approached with a genuine smile. "Good afternoon," he said warmly. "Welcome to Wells Community Automotive Center. How can I assist you today?" Donna hesitated for a moment, clearly surprised by his friendly demeanor. "Oh, I'm just looking," she said, her voice soft. Henry nodded, keeping his tone light and inviting. "That's perfectly fine. If you have any questions or want to see something up close, just let me know." To his surprise, Donna smiled back, a hint of relief in her expression. "Thank you," she said, her voice a little stronger. Over the next hour, Henry guided Donna through the showroom, answering her questions and sharing details about various models without a hint of pressure or condescension. As they walked, Donna began to open up, telling him about her recent retirement and her dream of buying a new car to celebrate this new chapter in her life. By the time they reached a sleek blue sedan, Donna's demeanor had transformed. She ran her hand along the smooth surface of the car, her eyes shining with excitement. "This is the one," she said, her voice filled with certainty. Henry couldn't help but smile. "Excellent choice, Ms. Donna. Let's sit down and go over your options." As they worked through the paperwork, Donna shared more about her life, including her passion for teaching and her plans to travel cross-country in her new car. Henry listened intently, genuinely interested in her story. By the time the deal was finalized, Donna was beaming. "You've made this whole process so enjoyable," she said, shaking his hand. "Thank you for treating me with such kindness." Henry felt a swell of pride, the kind he hadn't experienced in years. "It's been my pleasure, Ms. Donna. I hope you enjoy every mile in your new car." After she left, Henry sat at his desk reflecting on the interaction. He realized how different it had felt compared to his old approach, which had been driven solely by the desire to close a sale. This time, he had focused on building a connection, and the reward had been far greater than any commission. Ella continued to keep a close eye on the dealership's progress. She made regular visits, often sitting in on training sessions or observing interactions between staff and customers. Her presence was both reassuring and inspiring, a constant reminder of the values the dealership now upheld. One day, as she walked through the showroom, she spotted Henry speaking with a young couple who had brought their toddler along. The little boy was toddling around, giggling as Henry crouched down to hand him a small toy car. The parents looked on with smiles, clearly appreciative of Henry's genuine engagement. Ella couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was the same man who had once dismissed her so callously, now treating every customer with the respect and kindness they deserved. After the couple left, Ella approached Henry. "That was a lovely interaction," she said, her tone warm. Henry straightened, his face tinged with surprise and gratitude. "Thank you, Ms. Wells. It's been a learning process, but I'm starting to understand what you meant about treating every customer like they matter." Ella assentiu. "It's not just about making a sale, Henry. It's about building trust and leaving a positive impression. People remember how you make them feel, and that's what keeps them coming back." Henry hesitated, then said, "I want to thank you again for giving me a second chance. I know I didn't deserve it, but it's changed my life." Ella sonrió, su mirada firme. "Everyone deserves a chance to grow, Henry. What matters is what you do with it." As Ella turned to leave, Henry felt a renewed sense of determination. He resolved to continue proving himself, not just to Ella and Mr. Thompson, but to himself and the community he now served. The dealership's transformation didn't stop at its staff. Ella's vision for community engagement began to take shape in tangible ways. A new internship program was launched, offering young people from underprivileged backgrounds the opportunity to learn about the automotive industry. The program included hands-on training, mentorship, and workshops on everything from sales techniques to mechanical skills. One of the first participants was a high school senior named Jasmine. She was quiet and reserved at first, unsure of her place in such a professional environment. But under the guidance of Henry and Sarah, she began to blossom. During one mentorship session, Henry showed Jasmine how to conduct a customer consultation. As he explained the process, he made sure to emphasize the importance of listening and understanding the customer's needs. "It's not just about the car," he told her. "It's about the person sitting across from you. Make them feel heard, and you'll do more than sell a vehicle. You'll earn their trust." Jasmine nodded, taking notes diligently. Over time, she grew more confident, even stepping up to assist customers on her own. By the end of her internship, she had become one of the dealership's rising stars, earning praise from both staff and customers alike. Ella couldn't have been prouder. She made a point to attend Jasmine's internship graduation ceremony, presenting her with a certificate and a heartfelt speech about the power of perseverance and opportunity. "Jasmine, you've shown us all what can happen when potential meets determination," Ella said, her voice filled with emotion. We're lucky to have had you here, and I know you're destined for great things." Jasmine beamed, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you, Ms. Wells. This experience has changed my life." The dealership became a hub of activity, with new programs and initiatives rolling out regularly. Community events were held on the showroom floor, bringing together people from all walks of life. Job fairs, charity drives, and educational workshops became staples of the dealership's calendar, further solidifying its role as a pillar of the community. Ella's dream had become a reality, and the results spoke for themselves. Sales had increased, but more importantly, the dealership had earned the trust and respect of its customers and the surrounding community. Henry, once the symbol of everything the dealership had needed to change, had become one of its greatest advocates. He often volunteered to lead workshops or mentor new hires, sharing his journey as a way to inspire others. One evening, after a particularly successful community event, Henry found himself standing outside the dealership, gazing up at the sign that now bore Ella's name. The pride he felt was overwhelming, but it was tempered by a deep sense of humility. He thought back to the man he had been when Ella first walked through those doors, arrogant, dismissive, and blind to his own shortcomings. The journey to where he stood now had been anything but easy, but it had been worth every step. As he turned to head home, he spotted Ella leaving the building. He hesitated for a moment, then called out to her, "Ms. Wells?" She turned, her expression curious but welcoming. "Yes, Henry?" "I just wanted to say, thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Ella sonrió, sus ojos reflejando la bondad y la sabiduría que la habían guiado a través de tantos desafíos. "You've done the hard work, Henry. You should be proud of yourself." Henry nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. "I am," he said softly, "and I owe that to you." Ella reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You owe it to yourself, Henry, and to the people you've helped along the way. Keep going. The best is yet to come." As she walked away, Henry stood for a moment longer, the weight of her words sinking in. He smiled to himself, then turned toward the future with a renewed sense of purpose. As time passed, the changes at Wells Community Automotive Center continued to deepen. The dealership wasn't just a place to buy cars anymore. It had become a symbol of what a business could achieve when it embraced values of inclusion, respect, and community. The name itself had become synonymous with transformation, and people traveled from miles around to experience the customer service and see what the buzz was about. Ella's vision had inspired not just the staff, but the customers themselves. Testimonials poured in from people who had once felt overlooked or dismissed in similar settings. Many shared how their experiences at the dealership had restored their confidence, not just as customers, but as individuals. One of those stories came from a retired schoolteacher named Linda. She had visited the dealership hesitantly, intending to replace her aging car, but fearing she wouldn't be taken seriously. Instead, she was met with warmth and professionalism. "It wasn't just about the car," Linda later wrote in a glowing review. "It was about the way they treated me, with dignity and kindness. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen." The review went viral, and Ella read it with tears in her eyes. It wasn't about the praise for the dealership. It was about the impact they were having on people's lives. Each story, like Linda's, was a testament to the hard work and commitment of the staff, who had embraced their new roles as ambassadors of change. For Henry, every day was an opportunity to build on the progress he'd made. His transformation was more than just professional. It was deeply personal. He often thought about how his perspective had shifted, how his assumptions about people had been shattered and rebuilt into something stronger and more compassionate. One afternoon, Henry received a visit that brought his journey full circle. A young man in his early 20s walked into the dealership, wearing a hoodie and sneakers that had seen better days. He seemed nervous, his hands shoved into his pockets as he glanced around the showroom. Henry approached him with a genuine smile. "Welcome to Wells Community Automotive Center. My name's Henry. How can I help you today?" The young man hesitated, his eyes darting to the shiny cars on display. I'm just looking," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Henry nodded, keeping his tone warm and encouraging. "That's fine. Take your time. If you have any questions, I'm here to help." As the young man began to relax, he shared that his name was Malik and that he'd been saving for months to buy his first car. He didn't think he could afford anything at the dealership, but he'd heard about the community programs and wanted to see what they offered. Henry spent the next hour walking Malik through the options, explaining financing plans and gently guiding him toward a few reliable, affordable models. By the end of their conversation, Malik's initial nervousness had faded, replaced by a cautious optimism. "You've been really patient," Malik said as they sat down to go over the details. "Most places I've been to just brush me off because I don't look like I can buy anything." Henry felt a pang in his chest. He thought back to all the times he'd done exactly that to people like Malik, and it strengthened his resolve to never make those mistakes again. "Everyone deserves respect," Henry said simply. "No exceptions." By the time Malik left with the keys to his new car, Henry felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It wasn't just about the sale. It was about the connection, the trust he'd built, and the chance to make a difference in someone's life. Ella, meanwhile, had been busy expanding the dealership's reach. She had partnered with local organizations to create scholarships and mentorship opportunities for young people pursuing careers in the automotive industry. These programs were designed to break down barriers and provide a pathway for those who had been excluded from such opportunities in the past. At a community event celebrating the first round of scholarship recipients, Ella stood on stage, addressing the crowd with her signature blend of poise and passion. "Today isn't just about celebrating these incredible young individuals," she said, gesturing to the group of smiling scholarship recipients behind her. "It's about acknowledging the power of opportunity. When we invest in people, we invest in the future, and when we lift others up, we all rise together." The applause was thunderous, and Ella couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, "Always leave the world better than you found it." As the event wrapped up, Ella found herself approached by a familiar face. Sarah, the young salesperson who had been one of the first to embrace the dealership's new values. "Miss Wells," Sarah began, her voice filled with emotion, "I just wanted to thank you. Working here has been life-changing, not just for me, but for so many of us. You've shown us what it means to lead with kindness." Ella sonrió cálidamente. "Thank you, Sarah. But the credit belongs to all of you. It's your hard work and commitment that have made this vision a reality." Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening. "Still, none of this would have happened without you. You gave us a chance to be part of something bigger, and that means everything." Months later, the dealership celebrated its first anniversary under its new name and mission. The showroom was filled with laughter and music as staff, customers, and community members came together to reflect on how far they'd come. Ella stood at the center of it all, her heart full as she watched the fruits of their labor. The dealership had become more than just a business. It was a beacon of hope, a place where people felt valued and supported. Henry approached her with a plate of food from the buffet, a sheepish grin on his face. "Ms. Wells, you really know how to throw a party," he said. Ella rió. "It's not every day we get to celebrate something like this. You've all earned it." Henry's expression grew serious. "I just want to say thank you again, for everything. You didn't just change this place. You changed me." Ella placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady. "The change came from within you, Henry. I just gave you the tools and the opportunity. The rest was all you." As the night wore on, Ella found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought of her grandmother, whose wisdom and love had shaped her into the woman she was today. She thought of the pain she had felt during her first visit to the dealership and how she had turned that pain into purpose. Standing in the glow of the celebration, Ella knew that this was just the beginning. There were more challenges ahead, more lives to touch, and more opportunities to make a difference. But for now, she allowed herself to savor the moment, knowing that her grandmother would be proud. With a contented smile, she stepped outside into the cool evening air, the sounds of laughter and music fading behind her. She looked up at the stars, her heart full of gratitude and hope. "This one's for you, Grandma," she whispered. And with that, Ella walked forward, ready to embrace whatever came next. As Ella stood under the evening sky, she reflected on how much had changed over the past year. The dealership, once a symbol of arrogance and exclusivity, had been transformed into a place where people from all walks of life felt welcome. She knew her work wasn't done, not by a long shot, but the progress they had made was undeniable. The next morning, Ella was back at her office reviewing proposals for expanding their community programs. Her assistant, Grace, walked in with a stack of folders and a look of excitement. "Ms. Wells," Grace said, placing the folders on Ella's desk, "we've had an overwhelming response to the mentorship program. These are applications from people who want to join as mentors." Ella raised an eyebrow, pleasantly surprised. "That's wonderful. How many are we talking about?" "Over 200, Grace replied, her smile wide. Ella leaned back in her chair, a sense of pride washing over her. 200? That's incredible. Grace nodded. "People are hearing about what we're doing here and they want to be a part of it. We're becoming a model for how businesses can engage with their communities." Ella sonrió, pero su mente ya estaba corriendo con ideas. She knew they couldn't stop now. This momentum needed to be channeled into something even bigger. "Let's organize a summit," Ella said suddenly, her voice filled with determination. "We'll invite local businesses, community leaders, and anyone else who wants to learn about building inclusive workplaces. We'll share what we've learned and encourage others to follow suit." Grace's eyes lit up. "That's a fantastic idea, Ms. Wells. I'll start working on the logistics right away." As Grace left the room, Ella opened one of the folders, skimming through the applications. Each one told a story of people who had overcome adversity, who wanted to give back, who believed in the power of mentorship. It was a reminder of why she had started this journey in the first place. Meanwhile, at the dealership, Henry was busy preparing for another community workshop. This one was focused on teaching basic car maintenance to single parents, many of whom had never had the opportunity to learn such skills. As the participants filed into the workshop area, Henry greeted each of them with a warm smile. He recognized a few faces from previous sessions, including Malik, the young man he had helped purchase his first car. "Hey, Mr. Henry," Malik called out, waving enthusiastically. Henry grinned. "Malik, good to see you. Ready to get your hands dirty again?" "Always," Malik replied with a laugh. The workshop began, and Henry guided the group through the basics, checking oil levels, changing a tire, and understanding dashboard warning lights. He made sure to keep the tone light and engaging, cracking jokes and sharing stories from his own experiences. As he worked, Henry felt a sense of fulfillment that he had never experienced before. Teaching others, sharing his knowledge, it was more rewarding than he had ever imagined. During a break, Malik pulled Henry aside. "You know, Mr. Henry," Malik said, his tone serious, "I was thinking about what you said last time, about how I should believe in myself more." Henry nodded, encouraging him to continue. "Well," Malik said, rubbing the back of his neck, "I've been looking into automotive tech schools. I think I want to make a career out of this." Henry's face lit up with pride. "That's amazing, Malik. You'd be great at it. Have you started applying?" "Not yet," Malik admitted. "I'm still trying to figure out how to pay for it, but I'm going to make it happen." Henry clapped him on the shoulder. "If you need help, let me know. I'll do whatever I can to support you." Malik smiled, his confidence growing. "Thanks, Mr. Henry. That means a lot." As the workshop wrapped up, Henry watched the participants leave, their faces filled with newfound confidence. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what they were building, not just a dealership, but a community. The summit that Ella had envisioned quickly took shape. Invitations were sent out, and within weeks, The event was fully booked. Held in a grand conference center downtown, the summit featured panels, workshops, and keynote speeches, all centered around the theme of inclusion and empowerment. Ella stood at the entrance, greeting attendees as they arrived. Business owners, educators, nonprofit leaders, and community members filed in, each of them eager to learn and contribute. The highlight of the summit was Ella's keynote address. She stood on stage before a packed audience, her presence commanding but approachable. "Good morning," she began, her voice resonating through the room. "When I first walked into a certain dealership over a year ago, I was met with skepticism and judgment. It would have been easy to walk away, to let that moment define my experience. But instead, I chose to stay. I chose to use that moment as a catalyst for change." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Today, that dealership is a place where everyone is treated with respect and dignity. It's a place where employees feel empowered, where customers feel valued, and where the community feels supported. And it all started with one simple idea, that every person deserves to be seen, heard, and respected." The audience erupted into applause, and Ella continued, sharing the lessons she had learned and the principles that had guided her journey. She spoke of the power of second chances, the importance of education, and the transformative impact of empathy. As the day unfolded, attendees engaged in lively discussions and collaborative workshops. Ideas flowed freely, and many left the summit inspired to implement similar initiatives in their own organizations. Back at the dealership, the ripple effects of Ella's vision continued to grow. The internship program had expanded, and many of the participants had gone on to pursue careers in the automotive industry. Jasmine, the young intern who had once been shy and unsure of herself, had recently been hired as a full-time employee. One afternoon, Jasmine approached Ella, who was visiting the dealership to check on the new hires. "Ms. Wells," Jasmine said, her voice filled with emotion, "I just wanted to thank you. If it weren't for this program, I don't know where I'd be right now." Ella sonriò calidamente. "You've earned every bit of your success, Jasmine. I'm just glad we could provide you with the opportunity." Jasmine nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "You've changed so many lives, Ms. Wells, including mine." Ella placed a hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "And now it's your turn to pay it forward. Use what you've learned to help others, just like you were helped." "I will," Jasmine said, her voice steady with determination. As the second year of the dealership's transformation came to a close, Ella reflected on everything they had accomplished. The road had been challenging, but the rewards had been immeasurable. She knew there was still more to do, but for now, she allowed herself to savor the progress they had made. Late one evening, Ella sat in her living room, a cup of tea in her hands and a notebook open on the table in front of her. She was jotting down ideas for the next phase of their initiatives when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Henry. "Ms. Wells, I just wanted to say thank you again. This journey has been life-changing, and I owe so much of it to your guidance. I hope I can continue to make you proud." Ella sonrió, su corazón lleno. She typed a quick reply. "You already have, Henry. Keep going. The best is yet to come." With that, Ella set her phone down and turned her attention back to her notebook. The journey wasn't over, but the path ahead was brighter than ever.